Alright. Hey, what is up? Yes, this video is also going to be an Ask Me Anything, but before we... Actually, no, not even. That's the first and only time I'll mention it. You know, guys know the drill. Post whatever you want in the comment section, and I will answer it in whatever next video I decide to upload. So today, what is this you were seeing on the screen, hopefully? I originally intended to do this as a video... kind of a video cooking thing, but unfortunately, not having a production crew with me, it's incredibly difficult to cook while you're actually carrying around a handheld, and for me, I would actually need to use my camera, and I'm totally not getting curry over my freaking camera, because it's near and dear to my heart. What you are seeing is black curry. Why is it black curry? Well, you actually, in the final part of the cooking process, you take some bittersweet, unsweetened chocolate, 2 ounces to be precise. You toss it in there, and then you let it melt while stirring gently. You don't want to screw up the potatoes, screw up the carrots that you've worked so hard to simmer, and it takes on a dark brown blackened shape. So it's not an Indian curry. If I were to go with anything here, I would say kind of Japanese fusion. But I've cooked this dish a couple times. I refined down my own recipe for this, and it tastes freaking amazing. So I felt that I would share it with you. I will most likely end up editing this with the audio file as I'm cooking, and then just popping it in, popping the pictures I take in here, there, and everywhere. So I don't know what you are looking at right now, but I hope it tastes, or it looks as yummy as it tastes. I don't know, I'm going to try and recreate this for you and show you guys what's up. So, to get this out of the way, a couple things. You are going to need the following equipment before we start. First thing you're going to want is, personally for curry, I have always and always will use a Dutch oven. Dutch ovens are thick-walled, thick-bottomed cooking pans. They have a lid with them that seals very nicely. And as far as cooking curry, cooking chili, cooking something where you're simmering down a bunch of different ingredients, there's almost nothing better. If you don't have a Dutch oven on you, be sure that whatever you use has a thick bottom. You don't want to use... And if you have multiple pots, and like, well, they're all around the same thickness, use whatever the most expensive one is. You don't want to skimp on this, because if you get a thin-walled pot, we will burn your curry. Whether it's burning the onions while they're caramelizing, burning, I don't even know. After that, you're pretty much golden once you hit that phase. But you can still burn occasionally once you add in the other ingredients. So just be really careful about what you use. I will definitely include a picture of a Dutch oven in here at some point, so you'll get an idea for what it is. Food processor. If you don't have a food processor, a mortar and pestle will work, but it will be a lot of work. So I definitely, food processor, blender, something of the sort. If you need to know what it is for grinding up garlic that has already been grated into a refined paste. Having said that, you're going to need to want to strain it. As you strain it, personally for this, I have a specific tea infuser that I use. No, you cannot actually make tea with it after you put a bunch of garlic cloves through it. So definitely make sure that you have 2 if you want to make tea later on that day. And I just have it in a plastic bag and I label it garlic. Because for black garlic oil, it's something that you can actually use if you do a lot of Asian cooking, eat a lot of Asian meals. You just pop a drop or 2 on ramen, something like that. Tastes mighty fine. Other than that, you're going to need 1 or 2 frying pans. Just general. You guys know what a frying pan is. I would freaking hope so. And ingredient-wise. Alright, so that's all the prep work, that's all the extra stuff that I don't really... that isn't necessarily always handy, depending on the size of your kitchen, what you're cooking with, what you generally cook. Ingredient-wise, you're going to need some oil. This oil cannot have a taste that overpowers what you're frying. Salad oil is generally what this is considered. Personally, I'm going to use peanut oil for this. If you want to, for the onions, you can also use around 2 tablespoons of butter. Make sure that the butter is unsalted, as you will use the same for your roux. yeah, that's pretty much it. Just a couple tablespoons or so. It's not something you need to measure, just generally. Peanut oil works fine, vegetable oil, stuff like that. The things you don't want to use: dark sesame oil, light sesame oil, olive oil. Those are 3 that I would immediately nix off, because they will definitely overpower the meat, overpower the onions. Next, your protein source. Bit of a word on protein. You can use multiple cuts. You can use beef, you can use chicken, you can use pork. I wouldn't recommend using chicken for this curry specifically. It needs to simmer a long time, and the timings that I give you will be different. Now, if you're going to use pork or beef, completely interchangeable with regards to this recipe specifically. The cuts of pork that you want a shoulder cut, you want a pork butt cut. Butt is actually part of the shoulder, but it is not generally the same area that they take the shoulder cut from. It's slightly more marbled, and you will actually need to make sure that you trim off the excess fat. If you're using beef, trim off the excess silver skin that appears. That is very tough, and that's something that, even though we're simmering this for quite a long time, it's not something that it'll break down as easily as the other enzymes. Enzymes, wow, alright. Sorry, I'm doing this off the cuff too, so forgive any random like cooking noises you hear in the background, kitchen fans, stuff like that. The next thing you're going to want, 4 to 6 onions. Medium-sized, not large. If you want something more specific than that, personally, I use yellow onions. I would not suggest using red or white. If you want a specific type of white onion, I use either sweet Vidalia. That would be exactly what I'm using here. All right? 1.5 cups of red wine. Anything you can do. As long as you can drink it, you can cook with it. General rule to live by. You're going to need some water or chicken stock. Really, the chicken stock doesn't actually change the flavor of the dish. If anything, it actually adds a little bit more salt. Personally, I use water simply because of this. For other types of curry, if I'm using a milder curry, I will actually use dashi stock instead of chicken stock. All right? Carrots. 2 to 3, depending on what size they are. You want to cut them into half, 3/4 of an inch. Generally speaking, the small end of the carrot I tend to just cube up in around 1/2 inch cuts. The larger end, if it is actually a slightly large carrot, I'm going to go ahead and cut them into pieces of 4. You want to have them even regardless of how you cut them. If you prefer thicker cuts, go for it. As long as they're even, they will cook evenly. General rule. 2 Yukon Gold potatoes. You want them large. What is large? Large is about the size of my hand. Obviously, I might include a picture of my hands. Yeah, I'm going to include a picture of my hands so you guys can judge. Although I won't have a ruler next to it because I don't think I have one down here. Regardless, all right. Large Yukon Gold potatoes. You guys can get the drift. And you want to cut them into around the same size cubes as you cut the carrots. Again, uniformity will cook evenly. Oh, as far as the beef too, I'm going to use beef for this. You will see beef in the pictures. Because of this, I actually took it and put it in the fridge from the freezer the day before. Now, before I freeze it, I always, when I'm making a dish like this, always want to cut it first because the defrost time will be a bajillion times faster. And that's an estimate, not necessarily exact. Moving on. A little bit of salt, obviously, you'll have it there. 1 tablespoon of the tonkatsu sauce. So, this is something that you will find in Asian markets for sure. Supermarkets, the larger supermarkets generally have an Asian food section. What you're looking for, if it's not called, it's spelled Tonkatsu. It's a Japanese fish, meat, veggies, fruit sauce. It's pretty much the uniform, applies to anything. It's used in a lot of different recipes. If it's something you can't find and you're in a pinch, Worcestershire sauce. You substitute, I would go 3/4 of a tablespoon instead of a full tablespoon if you're going to use Worcestershire because it's a little bit stronger. The tonkatsu has a little bit of a sweet taste. It does actually taste quite good. You can use it as a condiment for a variety of things. Ketchup works too, although I wouldn't recommend ketchup because the next ingredient, tomato paste. Obviously, if it says tomato paste, it's tomato paste. This is the one thing that I won't actually make at home. I'll go ahead and buy it. The tonkatsu, I use a recipe and just make it in a bajillion. I don't know. I would say I have a good cup on hand at all times because I use it quite frequently. Next, 1 grated apple. I will use a Granny Smith apple, relatively large. As long as you would eat it, you can use it. I would not recommend a baking apple. I would not recommend a cooking apple for this. What are baking or cooking apples? If you don't know, it's something like a Rome. Roma apple. I'm just completely blanking on this at the moment. I was just at the freaking food store. My god. I can't, I'm sorry. I'm thinking of a bajillion other things while trying to get out all these ingredients so that I don't waste all too much time. Next, either 2 green cardamom pods or 1 black cardamom pod. The black, it actually tastes kind of smoky. I really like the flavor of it. Unfortunately, though, because they're, I don't know, it actually has absolutely nothing to do with the fact that they're cheaper. Black cardamom pods are harder to find where I live. I live in Philadelphia. If you live on the East Coast, I don't know. I honestly don't know what to suggest. I have not found them yet, and I have been searching for a good while. Many specialty stores. I may have to order them online, but it's not something I really want to invest in at this point. You're going to use 1 Star Anise pod. What is a Star Anise pod? It tastes and smells like licorice. You are not actually going to eat it, although, unfortunately, occasionally the pod will actually lose all of its stars, and it's something that you can't really, you won't be able to fish out because you can't actually find it until the fact that you actually bite into it, and then, yeah, whatever. It doesn't taste bad, to be honest. It's just something that you're like, oh, okay, I'm going to slightly set it aside on my plate. And it's going to be whole. Personally, I use dehydrated. It's something I cook with a lot. I just get a bag of them. Bags you can find in an Asian supermarket. I got them for $2.50, and it is a 4 ounce. 4 ounce bag of them. Dry. It's a pretty good weight. So I will not use it within 6 months, most likely. Next, 5 or 6 cloves of garlic, and you're going to want 1/3 to 1/4 of a cup of sesame oil. So make sure you do have some. I actually had to go out and buy some more because I was running low on it. It is a cooking oil that I use a lot, and it is something that you will not actually use for the curry itself. This is going to be a component of the dish. Next up, 1/2 cup of peas, whether they're frozen, whether they're fresh, doesn't matter. All right? If they're frozen, you simply cook them a minute longer. It takes so little time. You don't have to set it out to defrost. You don't have to put it in the microwave beforehand. Just peas. 1/2 cup to a cup, depending on your taste. Next will be for the roux. Some butter, unsalted, 100%. Never use salted butter for cooking, except when the recipe calls for it, obviously. A little bit of flour. I generally go tablespoon wise, around 5. 5 tablespoons, which would roughly equal around 1/3 of a cup. 2 tablespoons, I'm going to say 4 tablespoons of curry powder. I'm probably going to talk about curry powder a little bit when I get to that part, but, alright. So that is to come. And then a little bit of pepper. I will grind it into taste. That's it. That is all there is to it, alright? 100%. Now that ingredients are done, let's move on. Trying to think of... Alright, so time-wise, I just want to note this. As I'm starting, it is 3 p.m. By the end of the cooking process, I will be finished. My goal is to serve this at 6:15 to 6:30. And I've used this... I've cooked this, I would say, 4 or 5 times in the past, and takes roughly around 3.5 to 4 hours. That's a ballpark to shoot for. Now, it's not all active prep work, but it's not something where you can sit down and watch an episode of Justified, although I do have one on my laptop, if the need be, that I can have a half hour or so to sit down. It's something that as you cook more and more, you'll get, it'll be easier for you to just go from point A to point B to point C. Alright? So, now, why would I make a curry? Curry is something that I've always enjoyed. It's really kind of a feel-good meal. It is freaking cold outside today, and the heater actually turned off. So, although I generally cook on Sundays a meal that will just sit down slow and low, cook for enough to have a fair amount of extra servings that I can pop in the fridge and eat when I need to run. It's really enjoyable for me. I love the flavor, and this recipe specifically, it's not all that spicy. I will flavor it personally, but it depends on who you cook for. A lot of these spices are kind of to taste, and as well as the salt. If you're really used to cooking with like packets in your roux, ready-made curry packets, they're freaking salty as all hell. And generally, a lot of preservatives and stuff in them are not great for you. Having said that, it's a huge industry, all right? The curry field is just like, you'll literally go to an Asian food store, and there will be, especially if it's a Japanese food store, and you will have literally an aisle dedicated purely to curry mixes, all right? And that is not an exaggeration, 100%. Been there, done it, seen it. Tasting homemade curry is completely different. It has a different texture. All of the vegetables tastes. Well, the vegetables are something that you would always add in if you were cooking with a curry packet, but the actual consistency of it is completely different. It just you'll have to try it one time to really understand how awesome this is, and it's 100 times healthier for you, probably even more so. So, having said that, let's get going. The first thing I want to do is take out the smallest frying pan you have. Really, truly, you want it to be relatively small. Take 5 or 6 cloves of garlic, depending on how thick they are. I will go ahead and take a picture of the amount of garlic I have after I grate it, and then include that into the recipe. Get your food processor set up. You will need that eventually, but this is going to take a little while. What we are making is black garlic oil. To do so, go ahead and take 5 and 6 cloves of garlic. Peel them. Make sure you cut the ends off. If there is like a ridiculously green core, they're pretty young. Just core it out. You can use a paring knife for that. Pretty easy. And once you have it peeled, grate it. Grate it pretty fine. Next shot I include will be, let's see. A lot of this will be stop and start too, because I'm just gonna pause the audio recording, take a picture, do all my prep work in the meantime. So, of course, you will have like instant replay. All right. So hopefully I have a picture of the garlic when it is complete on the screen right now. Personally, I used 5 because the last head of garlic I had only had 5 cloves left. So I totally should have checked that before I went shopping, but I'm damn glad that I had enough. Now, you're going to want to take a 1/4 cup, or 4 tablespoons for those of you good at conversions, and pop that into the frying pan. You want to keep the frying pan on medium-low, but you don't need to keep it hot before you put in the oil, before you put in the garlic. Alright, so put the 1/4 cup of garlic, put the 4 tablespoons of oil in the pan. Add the grated garlic into the pan. Make sure that you get as much out as possible from whatever vessel you're carrying it in. I don't particularly like to grate stuff over the dish that I'm using, especially if it's hot, but even if not, you can get those like big chunks, and that is certainly not what you want here. Eventually, this is all going to become an oil. Like, you have the immersion of the garlic in there, and you will have a little bit of black garlic. It's like ground black garlic, to be honest, is what it looks like, consistency-wise. So, go ahead and keep it on medium-low heat, and you're going to want to heat it, put it on a back burner, something that you don't need. The largest burner that you have on your stove is going to be dedicated to the Dutch oven. For all intents and purposes, this is really a one-pot dish. You're going to pop everything in there. The only other frying pans you use, one for the garlic, one for the beef, one for the, or like pork or whatever your protein is. All right? So now go ahead, put that in the pan, and put it on medium-low. All right. So at this juncture, I will go ahead and put up a snapshot that I just took of the garlic. Now, you're going to want to let this sit for, I don't know. I'll actually time it because it's not something I regularly do. The goal here is to get it just to start browning, all right? When the majority of the grated, you can see like the granules in it. It's not like minced or anything. It's quite fine. I should definitely include a measuring tape in my pictures in the near future. So it's something to remind myself of. But you're gonna want to make sure that at least 70% of the garlic has started browning. The second it browns, turn it down to low. And I'll go ahead and time this for you guys too, so you have a rough estimate. But I want to say generally this takes around 40 to 50 minutes, which is why we're doing it first. Now, having said that, the garlic will take enough time to brown that you can start slicing your onions now. 4 to 6 onions, depending on how much you want, how oniony you want your curry to be. They end up caramelizing, so they reduce in volume so much. 6 onions, depending on how large you use, can actually take up a ridiculous amount of space when they're dry, alright? So, go ahead, slice your onions now, slice them pretty thin. How thin? I'll include a picture, why not, alright? Alright, at this juncture there should be a picture of the sliced onions. How fine do you want to slice them? Really, it's up to you, it's personal taste. I have a method that works quite well for me. I end up just using a big chopping knife and using the weight really to get them quite thin, only because they'll cook faster. It's not that I absolutely need my curry done the split second that it can be. I actually let it simmer for a lot longer than some recipes call for. But as far as the caramelization process goes, this is the one that's going to be most active. If you're using a pot with a lid and you have to use a pot with a lid, even if it doesn't have a dedicated lid, find something to cover it, please. 100% necessary. Alright, now the onions are going to go ahead and sit and stew in the butter for... For reference, I use 2.5 tablespoons of butter. You can use more, you can use less. I just don't want it to... you will have a little bit of butter. I don't know if you can see it at the time I took my picture or not, but there will be a little bit of butter left in the pan around 10 minutes later. So for the first 10 minutes, after you put your butter in, make sure that the butter is all over the base of the pot. Turn the heat down to... I want to say medium-low. Put the cover back on and sit there for 10 minutes. Now, while they're cooking for 10 minutes, you're going to want to check the onions I would say only once, really. In all honesty, check the onions once in that 10 minutes. Make sure that you have a spatula so that you can scrape off any onions that are already sticking to the bottom of the pan. You will have a couple, and you will eventually inevitably get browning no matter how awesome the pot is that you use. Alright? So that's something to keep in note. It doesn't necessarily mean that you screwed up, unless you see a ridiculous amount of black at the bottom there, and it should never happen if you're active cooking. You're fine. Alright? So go ahead, keep the lid on, check it in 5 minutes, put the lid back on after you finish checking it, making sure that there's nothing sticking, and then come back in another 5 minutes. Alright, so the next thing you're going to want to do is serve your protein. Now, it should be, at this point, I have already uncovered the pot. Now, you're going to want to let them sit for around an hour after you uncover them. This is the onions, mind you. Make sure you keep the heat down on medium-low, between medium-low and low. Not too high, you don't want them to burn. And because the pot's open, it's going to be a lot easier to check it. Definitely keep attentive to it. Make sure that you keep a spatula running through it. I do it like every, I don't even know. It's not something you measure, just, I would say 8-10 minutes. Now the beef, you want it to be completely and utterly dry. I'll go ahead and include a picture of, here, let me take a picture quickly. Alright, there we go. There should be a picture of beef I don't know, around a pound cut into, I would say, they look like around an inch. I should have a measuring tape down here. I'm gonna kick myself every time that comes up. But it's really important that you just let it dry, especially if it's been sitting in your freezer and it's not 100% fresh, because you're gonna want to sear it, and it will not freaking sear no matter how hard you try. It'll just straight up burn if it has too much water in it. Now, go ahead and take. I use a spoon. I just use one. We have large spoons. We have small spoons. Obviously, they're modeled somewhat to resemble tablespoon and teaspoon size. I use the big one, tablespoon size. I would say 1.5 of the spoonfuls, enough to coat the bottom of your pan and not be too overly oily. Make sure that right before you do this, salt and pepper to taste, just a tiny, tiny, tiny bit. If you're using coarse salt, use a ridiculously low amount, right? Go ahead, transfer that into the oil. Make sure your pan is hot first. You're gonna want it at medium-high heat. How do you check if it's hot? Since we're not deep frying or anything, we don't need it to stick temperature needle, nothing of the sort. Go ahead, run your hand under water, and then put a dash of that water on the pan. If it sizzles, it is hot enough. Make sure that you do keep it at medium-high heat, though. You want to sear it. If you do it right, they will be slightly black before you flip them. I will go ahead and time for you how long it takes me, but each stove is different. What you look for after you put all the beef in the pan, make sure that you have the beef will just start to be graying around the halfway mark. The beef itself will look like it's kind of opening up. All those natural marble lines will end up splitting just a tiny, tiny, tiny bit. And as soon as you can flip it over with a tong and see that one is just starting to brown, just starting to get a little bit black, flip it over. All right? They're going to be cooking for a ridiculously long time, so you don't need to worry about cooking. You're just looking for that sear, all right? Okay, so I'm going to include another picture. They are just now starting to appear that they're ready to be flipped. Now, how long did it take? I'm glad you asked. It took exactly 6 minutes. Again, this is for my personalized heat, but just the signs that I already told you guys. Once you flip, it'll take another 2 minutes, 3 minutes, not longer. I can guarantee you, regardless of how your stovetop cooks. All right. Now that that is complete, go ahead, and as soon as you have the beef finished, you're not gonna want to put them in paper towels again. Just take a food. I'm honestly, to keep my the dishes I need to clean down, I'm probably gonna just end up taking a bowl that I would use for some sort of soup, and I'm gonna pop it in there. You don't want to retain the oil, so make sure that you use a spatula or tongs to pick it off without getting all of that excess oil. You already have fat that you're cooking the onions in, all right? And remember, keep using that spatula on the onions, all right? All right, at this juncture, the garlic has just started browning. Now, what does the brown garlic look like? All right, bam. Just took another picture. It's not. It won't look like. It'll not be completely brown. All right. Once it's gotten completely brown, it's actually pretty close to the blackening process. At this point, it's actually been cooking for 15 minutes already. And in the meantime, my beef is cooked. That's around a good measure. You definitely want to keep attentive to it. The second it starts to get brown, hopefully I got in the picture. There are two layers really. You're using enough oil if you have a thick pan, or a small enough pan where the oil is actually, it's not simply a coating. You can actually see oil there. Hopefully it transfers in the picture. And the bottom half of the garlic is just starting to brown a little bit. When it hits that, you want to turn it between medium and medium-low. All right, I have 10 notches on this little burner that I'm using. I turn it down to 3. It's a good indication, somewhere between 1 and 4. And you're going to want to keep it here For me at least, because this is the pan that I always use to do this, it takes roughly around 25-30 minutes, almost to the point where your onions are complete. And that's your goal, because you want to add this in when the onion's complete. Now, having said that, check your onions again. It has been, it's 3:41 now, so I put the onions in around, I don't know, 3:10-ish. So definitely be sure to check on your onions. They can be done sooner, they can be done a little bit later, alright? Good. Now, alright, so my onions are going to sit for a while. I would say they're halfway done at this point. They are reducing a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and take another picture in a second or so. But in the meantime, this is a great time to go ahead and prep your onions. Or, sorry, onions are already cooking, whatever. You're going to want to prep your carrots, prep your potatoes. I already talked about how you want to cut them. I will include a picture of the potato with my hand. I would say, I'm going to measure my hand at some point and try and give you guys a good indication. I have long fingers, but I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. Now, one thing to note that I forgot to mention is that if you are going to be leaving the potatoes out for any longer than, I would say, 20-25 minutes, make sure that after you cut them, you put them in water. You can add just a tiny bit of salt to the water, but it's important that you don't want them to oxidize. If you're really anal about it, if you're going to be letting them out for a ridiculously long time in the open, put a teaspoon of vinegar in there, white vinegar, the kind you would use to clean your counter, stuff like that. All right? Okie doke. Onions have just completed. I don't know. I had to wait, I would say, around 5 minutes after I completed the prep work on my onions and on my carrots and my potato. I don't know why I keep saying onions. I just have them on my brain. So you can see hopefully you can see in the photo how I actually had to take this like 2 or 3 times because my lens just kept steaming up. It will get steamy later. Actually, I have to think about that. All right. There will be a little bit of transfer of the, just in the browning process of the onions to the bottom of the pan. This is completely fine. This is completely normal. As soon as you add in the liquids, like the wine, the water, you're going to want to make sure you have that spatula. Make sure it's a plastic, and make sure it's either a resin or something that does not, you don't need to worry about it getting too clingy with food, because you actually do want to keep that brown in the bottom of the pan with the curry itself. And just go ahead and you can go pretty hard and just scuff up the bottom of the pan back and forth, back and forth, back and forth until you have that up. All right? Alright, so now that you have this complete, it is a good time to talk about the black garlic because it is just now finished. How long? It's been 42 minutes exactly since I actually put it in. Not since it's been sitting on low. I would say that's been about 25-30 minutes. I'm not exact though, so it's something I forgot to check. Now, the second that your garlic starts to get black, you're going to take it off the heat. Immediately take the frying pan off the heat and transfer it into a Pyrex. Why is it important that you transfer it into a Pyrex? You need to get it out of the frying pan because the frying pan is still freaking hot. And you don't want your garlic to burn a lot. It's a very thin line between burning your garlic and having your garlic slightly blackened. and it can mean the difference between actually a usable black garlic oil or burnt to hell crap, alright? So I will go ahead and include another photo of this once I transfer it to the Pyrex, but my hands are, I actually have the boom mic. I brought it downstairs so I don't have to worry about like touching it every time I need to talk. And make sure that you have it transferred to a Pyrex. Because it's going to be really, really hot. And you want that to cool 100% before you use the food processor on it. Else it gets gooey and it won't really work effectively. Trust me on that. That was one of the first mistakes that I ironed out of this recipe. All right, so I tried to get as close up as I could without screwing up my camera lens, and this is really going to show you're not looking for 100% black consistency. To be honest, actually, the majority of the black and garlic pieces are toward the bottom, but you do want to pull it out before the overwhelming majority of your garlic turns black, because by that time, most likely, some of them have really gotten a solid burn on it, and that will screw up the oil. Now, as soon as this is cooled, it probably will take around, I don't know. I'm using a pretty big vessel to store it in, so it'll take most likely 15-20 minutes. The second that's cooled, you're going to want to toss it in the food processor, put it on the highest setting. And it's not really important that you get every single piece of visible garlic down, but you want to get it enough to where your strainer will not be overburdened. Because then you just have to, it's so freaking annoying, especially when you're using a really fine strainer like I do, with the T-balls, because then you don't have to like go repeatedly, empty it out, put some more oil in, empty it out, put some more oil in as you strain it. You really want it to be as fine as freaking possible. I have an ice crush filter on mine. It seems to make it go faster than high, so I go ahead and spam the ever-living crap out of it, like your micro marines or something, alright? Now, at this point, I've finally finished the food processor part. I have to say, like, there are some thin bits of garlic. I'm going to go ahead and include another photo in here, too. You'll have, like, a little bit of the black oil at the bottom. That's going to be what remains of the actual blackened garlic. And then you'll have some coating the pan. Ideally, when you're trying to save something like this, make sure you keep it in a glass container. I don't have one handy, so I'm putting it in a just like a general plastic Tupperware container. Just make sure if you are using a plastic Tupperware, I have like a clasp that actually seals the air out. It's really important because you want it to keep as long as possible, and garlic will go bad. Yeah, so definitely keep a handle on that. Now, the second this is complete, most likely your onions have finished. My onions, I don't know. They still have a good 5-10 minutes to go, I think. You want them to reduce in volume a fair amount before you start adding the liquids in. But once you add the liquids process in, I'll just go ahead and talk about that when it actually happens. All right, be right back. Alright, now comes the fun part. You do want to make sure that you have your spatula handy while you're doing this, and also, be careful about spilling. You have a lot of liquid that you're adding in here for the first time. So, obviously, this goes without saying, before you enter this stage, alright, this is actually important, because this is something that I prepped beforehand that I didn't actually talk about. I am wearing something that I do not actually care about. It happens to be my high school cross-country sweatshirt and sweatpants. Yeah. Meanwhile, the other things I've done. The first couple times I made curry, my coat that is actually in the room, in a closet in a room connected to the kitchen, it smelled like curry for a good couple days. Because of this now, I go ahead and I close the doors into my house that I can. if you're in a small apartment, you most likely you'll have doors. If you end up cooking your dining room, making it smell like curry, it's a good smell. It's a good smell. It's just not, other people don't tend to think about it the same way you do. I just go ahead and I pop my coat on my bed, close my door, stuff like that. All right. The smaller your area of cooking, the more important this is, right? So now, having said the fun part, all right, you want to going ahead to want to take a bay leaf, put the bay leaf in there. You're going to want to go take the Star Anise, put the Star Anise in there. You have Saigon cinnamon. Oh, this is something I forgot to talk about. All right, Saigon cinnamon, Cassia Bark. Let's see. I think my label actually says Cassia Bark. What is it called? Vietnamese cinnamon, Asian cinnamon, Saigon cinnamon, Chinese cinnamon. Some places, the ground stuff is almost like 99% called Saigon cinnamon. The actual solidified stuff that you're going to be using is called Cassia Bark. If you are going to go ahead and substitute cinnamon for this, you can't find Cassia Bark. It's really cheap, pretty easy to find in Asian markets, but if you only have cinnamon sticks, use 2 cinnamon sticks. Not 1, 2. If you're using the Cassia Bark, only use 1. The pieces are around 2.5 to 3 inches. You'll know, like, you don't have to think about, oh, I'm going to cut this half off. No, it's just like, you can't break them without a ridiculously awesomely sharp knife. So you're going to want to pop that in there. You're going to want to pop the tonkatsu sauce in there, tomato paste in there, the black cardamom pod. Again, 2 green cardamom pods or 1 black cardamom pod. The whole pod, you don't need to worry about seeding it or anything. The flavor will actually come out because all the seeds will be turned to mush by the heat. I'll talk about this a little bit too once I get into the curry powder section of this. The red wine, 1.5 cups, 2.5 cups of water, and add this slowly. This is the stuff that'll really be victim to spilling. You're going to want to pop those potatoes in there. Make sure if you're using them in water like I did, you drain them before you put them in there. You're going to want to have the carrots. I would say, around a teaspoon of salt. A little bit more if you like things saltier, but you can always add more salt. You cannot take it away. It's really important that you only put the bare minimum in. So I would go ahead and stick with 1 teaspoon at this point. Go ahead and put your meat in there. The meat that you seared so lovely. What else do we have? I'm looking around. Oh yeah, the black garlic oil. You want to pop a teaspoon of that into. Only use a teaspoon, not the entire freaking batch. It's something that'll be good. You can sprinkle it on Asian stuff. Soups, if you like to make soup, it's great. Great to put a couple drops there, especially if you're making pho, something like that. Something mighty fine. And through this process, again, remember the spatula. You're going to want to scrape all that goodness off and incorporate that into your sauce. Alright, I don't think I'm missing anything. I'll just actually include this as I'm putting the ingredients in, so I don't forget something. Oh, the apple too. Alright, so you're going to want to grate an apple into there. I'm using Granny Smith. Relatively large size. I would say medium large. It's not like those uber steroid apples that they sell at the supermarkets that are just monstrous. It's like, they're almost freaking melons, I swear to God. Alright, so I would say this is the one part that you get to have a little bit of time to yourself. Now, what are you going to do? I'm going to go ahead with your cover. Dutch ovens, it's really easy for me. I'm going to go ahead and take a picture of how I'm going to cover this. You want to, after you have all the ingredients in, turn it up to high heat, alright? The second it starts to simmer, you have to be really attentive to this too. It's not going to take all that long, regardless of how high and how fast your stove heats. Make sure that the second it simmers, you turn the heat down to between medium-low and low. You want to be really active about checking this. You're going to keep this simmering for the better part of 1.5 to 2 hours at this point. Yes, some recipes call for like, oh, let it simmer for 30 minutes. No. Especially if you're using a cut of beef instead of pork butt. The longer you cook it, the better it will taste. Guarantee you, as long as you're not using chicken. This calls for pork or beef, right? Remember that? The enzymes will naturally start to break down in the pork. It'll become melt in your mouth stage. And this is also, while I do serve the curry the day I make it, it will taste better literally the second day because the meat's been sitting in that for, well, 24 hours. I mean, in the fridge, right? So make sure you always check to see whether it's simmering or not. Having said that, though, you're going to want to keep the lid on with just a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of space in it. I'm going to go ahead and include another picture of this. I'll just go ahead and pop that over. Give me a second. All right, there we go. Lovely. Now, it's a ridiculously small slit. There actually isn't, there's a tiny bit of space on the other side, but really, just make sure that you keep it as much covered as you can without completely covering it. It'll lock if I push it down any further, all right? That's a good way to sell, especially if you're using a Dutch oven like I am. Now, at this point, you can really just sit back. You're going to want to come back in around 30 minutes, all right? You're going to do 2 things in 30 minutes, but until then, you have 30 minutes. However, during this is pretty active time, so you can't leave the room. Make sure that it's simmering, and gradually, you're going to want to turn the heat as low as you possibly can while it still remains simmering. Now, why don't you turn it to low immediately? Because it won't really work. It won't work the way you want it to. It'll just stop simmering immediately. If you turn the heat down slowly, gradually, over a course of 5 minutes, it will actually keep simmering on like between low and 2 for the setting that I use. I've cooked in this for so freaking long. And I really like braising dishes because it's something that's not necessarily active work for extended period of time. And like for my taste preferences, tastes mighty fine. All right. All right. So now this is the second time I'm coming back. Exactly 6 minutes have passed since I ended up turning it on medium-low. At this point, I finally got it to low while it's still simmering. Now, because a couple minutes have passed, you're going to want to, I'd say come back in 10 minutes the first time and in 20 minutes the second time. So I lied. I guess it's going to be around 35, 40 minutes that you're going to want this to simmer before you start cooking again. All right? In the meantime, too, get out a saucepan that is the smallest. I'm actually going to use a pot. I'm going to use a pot for this. I'm going to use a really small pot, stainless steel. It doesn't need to be thick-walled or anything. This is going to be to make your roux, all right? If you've ever made a roux before, for any variety of recipes, that's what it's going to be for. So you already know, hey, I've used this pot before. There we go, right? All right, so now the roux. For the roux, refresher, you're going to need 3 tablespoons of butter. Pop that up. Make sure that you have medium-low heat. I use between medium-low and medium. Make sure that all the butter is melted, and the second that all of the butter melts, it's going to start to froth a little bit. It's going to start to bubble. Wait until the bubbling subsides for the most part, and that is when you're going to add your flour in. As far as flour goes, I would use 1/3 of a cup of flour. That's a good measure. Personally, I can't actually tell you the measurement of it because I just use a specific spoon that we have that is not actually supposed to be used for measuring, that I generally work with when I'm going for a roux. All right, and then it gets to the curry powder phase. Now, before I actually melt this up, I'm gonna go ahead and talk to you a little bit about curry powder. This is an opinion. This is my opinion. You can take it or leave it. But after you've tasted this, hopefully you will go ahead and trust me. Do not dry roast grounds of curry powder ever, regardless of what you're using. Whether you're using fresh stuff that you grow on yourself, or you're using store-bought stuff. All right. Having said that, I make my own curry powder, and when I make my own curry powder, I take all the individual spices, and then I roast them separately, and then as soon as they start to actually have a scent to fill the room, I take them off, I put them in a spice grinder. As long as it's the cardamom, I go ahead and peel the cardamom pods out and then take the seeds and put them in. whatever. All right. So the fennel, there's actually a lot. The one thing I have to say I cheat on is the cinnamon. All right. I do use ground cinnamon and ground ginger because you can't. I'm not going to sit there and I'm going to grind cinnamon. And as far as you need to use the crystallized ginger powder, because if you use grated ginger or something and you don't dry it sufficiently, it will gum up your spice grinder. All right. If you have a coffee mill, you can use the coffee mill too, but also make sure that you don't make coffee with whatever you use after that fact. So for me personally, spice grinders are hella cheaper. If you want to be ghetto, you can actually use a black spice grinder or a black pepper grinder. Just make sure that you empty it out and you go through a little bit of coarse salt. You want to grind some coarse salt in there that'll clean it. You don't have to wash it or anything. That'll end up mudding it up if you don't let it dry for a ridiculous amount of time, and you don't want to do that because it takes a lot more time. Now, if you're using store-bought curry powder, all right, make sure that you taste it because you're going to want to add either more or less depending on how spicy it is, because they're all generally different. If I were going to recommend a store-bought, I wouldn't even. I'm not even going to go there. I did use McCormick at some point because I had to. I did not have access to curry powder, and it was something I like ridiculously had this urge to make curry. But I'm going to go ahead and include the recipe that I use to make it fresh in the description. So you guys, if you are adventurous, you can give it a go. But make sure you do not dry roast the ground stuff. All right, you're only doing that for the whole spices. Don't say like my friend told me so. If you trust your friend more than me, though, go for it. A lot of the different, they all have different frying temperatures. Obviously, you're not doing it in oil, but you can literally burn some spices while you don't others. Some won't even be aromatic while you burn. I don't know what has higher burning temperatures, but I'm sorry. I'm going a little bit overboard with this, but it's quite important. Overall, for this, you're going to use 2 tablespoons of the curry powder, all right? For the roux, and then a little bit of black pepper. I just grind a little bit on top. Adds a little bit more spice to it. Yes, I do actually use some black pepper while I grind the curry powder, but depending on how spicy you want it, you may want to add a little bit extra. I do. Now, at this point, I've added the flour into the roux, and you can see you want a golden brown color. The second you finish adding the flour, it'll start to bubble up a little bit. I will use a picture for this. Make sure that you use either some sort of like rubber spoon or a rubber whisk. Personally, I'm using a rubber whisk. Eventually, you use a little finer whisk when it eventually comes time to add this into the liquid that you've been cooking the curry into the Dutch oven pot, right? So the picture that I'm taking right now is going to be of me just popping the curry powder into the roux, all right? And bam. So now, congratulations, your everything just smells like curry powder, right? This is the first time that you're really getting a whiff of it. So it smells a little bit like the cinnamon cooking as soon as you add in all of the liquids to the pot. No, this is round 2. This is the real 1-2 punch here. So now that your kitchen has sufficiently been intoxicated with curry smells, go ahead and take that off the heat. The second you add in, I should have mentioned this earlier. The second you add in the curry powder, make sure you take this off the heat. You do not want it to burn. No, that is a no-no. And then once it's sufficiently mixed, it can have a couple lumps in there. You're going to work the lumps out eventually, all right? Keep that off the burner. Now, at this same time, go ahead, add another tablespoon of the curry powder, except this time you're going to add it into the stuff that's been simmering, and it has been simmering now for the hell time that I started. It's 4:15 right now. I think it's been around 35 or 40 minutes that the liquids have been simmering in there. At this point, I already have it on my setting. My setting is between low and 2. I think I've already mentioned that. I don't know 100% though. You're going to want to go ahead and let it simmer for I'm going to say in total, after you add the liquid in, simmer it for at least an hour and a half. I'm probably going to go for around 2 hours because, again, I want to cook. I want to be eating at around 6:30. The next stage, I mean, this is, like, congratulations, you're at a point where you absolutely have no work to do. The next thing you're going to be doing is cooking your rice if you are going to serve this with rice. Preferably, I would go with either Japanese short grain white rice or brown rice, whatever your favorite brown rice is. Personally, my electric rice cooker that I have doesn't cook brown rice all that well, and I really don't feel like dirtying another pot to have to clean it, so I will be going ahead and cooking myself up some Japanese short grain white rice. Make sure that if you are most of the rice packages have English on them, but just make sure that you do not you're not going for the glutinous sweet rice or the mochi rice, because that can lead to a very sticky situation. It might taste okay, but you can go ahead and try it sometime if you make mochi. I'm actually going to go ahead and show you guys at some point. All right, so that's definitely on my to-do list of if this ends up going over well, I will unveil my homemade mochi recipe because it's damn awesome-tastic. Congratulations, an hour and a half after I have completed the what am I completing? After I have added in all the liquids, this is exactly what it looks like. All right. One thing I forgot to mention: you will have a little bit of brown scuff as the cooking process whittles down the amount of liquids that you have in there, and it starts to thicken. You'll get a little bit of scum on the edge. You're going to want to incorporate that scum. You've probably already seen this when you're coming back to check on it readily. And at this point, yeah, it's been like an hour and 40 minutes, I think. I'm going to go ahead and start my rice now. My rice takes exactly 25 minutes to cook. I know that because it's the specific rice cooker that I use. I always end up starting this last page, this last phase of the recipe, exactly 25 minutes from the end. Now, what are you going to want to do? Remember that chocolate, remember that unsweetened chocolate, remember those frozen peas I was talking about? Pull the frozen peas out, measure out 3/4 of a cup or so, and get them ready. Now, next important part, you're going to want to incorporate the roux into the actual curry powder. Now, you're familiar with this if you use like ready-made curry packets, because it's basically like, I forget what you add to the roux, but you basically end up making the roux. You want to make sure that there are absolutely no lumps here. I'm going to be using a really thin whisk. I will get a shot of the whisk that I use in there. I'll make sure to incorporate that, and take some of with a ladle eventually the ladle that you'll use to serve. If you really don't want to wash extra dishes, go ahead and take out whatever serving ladle you're going to use and ladle some of the juice, just the juice of the curry. Make sure that you don't get any veggies or anything. The stuff that everything's been soaking in, ladle that out and put about a half to 1 full ladle of that mixture in with the roux. Remember, this is all off the heat stuff. Because the Dutch oven has been over the heat, the curry will actually loosen up the roux a little bit if it has gotten thick. All right, now use a really fine whisk and whisk this until there are absolutely no freaking lumps. If there are lumps, you're gonna taste it, and you're gonna regret that you didn't spend the extra minute or so to make sure that there weren't any. Gradually add more and more of the liquid. You won't need any more than a full ladle, though. I can guarantee you. If you do, you're screwing something up. Be careful. So you're gonna want to get this thin. I'm gonna go ahead and take another picture right now as I go ahead and complete that phase. All right. Okay, so now this is what it should look like when there are no lumps. I think maybe you can be able to see 1 or 2 lumps, but it's really, really fine. This is a really close shot that I took, so hopefully it doesn't go out of focus or anything. And now the fun starts. All right, so your rice is cooking during all of this. Remember that. Now you're gonna want to take the roux and mix it in gradually into the curry itself. Do this off of the heat. Make sure that it is not over a heat source when you do this. This is very important. Make sure that it happens, all right? Take it off the heat, and you're gonna want to be very gentle with it. If you're not, you'll muddy up the potatoes, and you don't want granulated potato. It just tastes like crap. Been there, done that. Don't want to do it again. All right, so be careful with it. Think of it as you're mixing in egg whites. You're folding egg whites into, I don't know, whatever recipe you feel that you bake best with egg whites. All right. Once every single little droplet of that has been added into the mixture, put it back over a heat source, raise it up to medium, and then the second it starts to simmer again, turn it all the way down to low and cover it. All right. You're going to want to let it sit for a little bit, and it will get thick, but you want to make sure that it's incorporated evenly. If you have pockets of the roux, it will not end up tasting as good. All right, trust me on this. You're going to want to make sure that it's all even. All right, now that it is even in, go ahead, cook it. It'll end up getting a little bit thinner. Oh, shoot. Something I did that I forgot to talk about is before you add in the roux, I will make a note of this in the crap. This is gonna be difficult, but I will make a note of this in the video. Make sure that you have, make sure that you take out the Star Anise. Make sure that you take out the Cassia Bark, the bay leaf, 1 or 2 cardamom pods, however many you put in there. And, was there anything else in there that I need to take out? I don't think so. That's it. But you really don't want to, because some of the roux will stick, especially to the Cassia Bark. It is notorious for that. So you're going to want to make sure you take that out before you add the roux into the actual curry. All right? Now, having said that, go ahead, let this simmer for another 5-10 minutes, and then add in your frozen peas. Once you add in your frozen peas, let it cook. If they're frozen, I would say 2 minutes. If they're fresh, I would say a minute. I'm not exaggerating. It takes a ridiculously short amount of time. Now, once the frozen peas are cooked, how do I know this? Well, I know this because my rice cooker will go from being done to keep warm. It'll switch from like active, that it has an orange light. When the orange light turns on, generally around, I don't know, I would say 3-4 minutes after you add the peas in, which would be 20 minutes after you, exactly 19 minutes have passed since I added my, since I added the liquid into the roux and the roux into the curry. So it's been thickening through that time. Now, once the peas are cooked, and if your rice has a keep warm feature, the rice keep warm feature is on, go ahead, cut the chocolate into, my chocolate comes in 4 pieces for 2 ounces. 2 ounces are exactly half of the packaging. And I cut them again into halves, and I pop them in there. This is something you're going to want to fold in. You're going to fold this in like you would egg whites into some sort of dish. I can't, honestly, I used to be a really big baker, but when you get into a smaller apartment, it's one of the things to go. You guys have been there, you've done that. All right? So I'm going to go ahead and take another picture now that the frozen peas have been added in. All right, so this is what it looks like with the frozen peas added in and the roux added in. All right? Now you're going to want to fold in the chocolate. Let it melt. Make sure that the chocolate, each bar of the chocolate has completely melted. Take it off the heat source, and then you're good to go. Literally, you are done. You're completely done. Congratulations, you have made absolutely awesome-tastic curry. If you want it a little bit spicier, now is the time that you can add in another half of a tablespoon to a tablespoon of the curry powder. Personally, if I wanted any spicier, the most I would go is like a little bit over a half of a tablespoon, or a couple teaspoons, and then just use sriracha if I really want the extra heat. But it is awesome without anything because, I don't know, you'll taste it, it'll taste good. I'm sure you will be happy with it. If not, I'm dreadfully sorry, but I hope you had a fun experience making it. Now I just, like, you will get to this point and it will smell so freaking good. I've been hungry for the past good hour and a half or so. I'm really gung-ho to go eat this. I hope you've enjoyed this. Leave me some feedback as far as what you would see. This is my first time doing an audio log like this while I'm cooking. I think hopefully with the audio edits that I do, taking out my random, I have an incessant habit of banging the whatever soup spoon I'm using on the Dutch oven, so hopefully I've edited all of those out. And the fan noise for the most part. This is my first time trying something like this, so any feedback you guys can give me would be great. I hope you've enjoyed the dish. I hope you enjoyed cooking it, eating it, all of that jazz, and even cleaning up after it. So this does make, I would say, a good 6 or 7 servings, depending on how much you eat of it. Rice-wise, remember you do have starch in the potatoes, so you don't need all that much. Hope you've enjoyed. Peace. Talk to you later.